Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. Have you ever wondered how Edgar Allan Poe put on his boots? No? Well, that is unfortunate, because Poe's boot hooks are the subject of tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. Well, these are Edgar Allan Poe's boot hooks. This is what he used to pull up his boots. And these have been here at the museum ever since it opened back in 1922. In fact, these were the 35th item to enter the museum's collection. They came directly from the collection of William Lanier Washington. Now, remember that name. It'll come in handy later. But why should you care about these? Now, sure, they're rare surviving examples of some of the things Poe owned, and he didn't own a whole lot. And a lot of his possessions have been scattered, lost, forgotten. Very few of them are still available for you to see, and a lot of them are right here at the Poe Museum. But what about these? Well, just like any piece in the museum's collection, these tell a story. Poe had these with him up until just about 2 weeks before his death. He left them here in Richmond at his sister Rosalie Mackenzie Poe's house. And her foster brother, or Poe's good friend, John Hamilton Mackenzie, said that Poe habitually carried these with him. And of course, why wouldn't he? He needed them to pull up his boots. But let's backtrack a little bit. On Poe's last visit to Richmond, he was coming here to sell stories to the Southern Literary Messenger, to sell subscriptions to a new magazine he'd intended to start, and he was courting his old girlfriend, Elmira Royster Shelton. So he checked into the Swan Tavern up on Broad Street, which eventually proved to be too expensive. But he needed a location that was close to downtown, to the messenger office, and also close to Elmira's house. So he moved down to Main Street to a cheaper place, the Madison House. And when that proved too expensive, he moved out of downtown altogether, miles out to the west, to the western outskirts of Richmond, to Duncan Lodge, where Poe's sister lived with her foster family, the Mackenzies. And said that's where he spent his last few weeks in Richmond. And he had already been good friends with her foster brother, John Hamilton Mackenzie, also Thomas Mackenzie, their foster mother, Jane Scott Mackenzie. And it said that Poe really made himself at home. They had a special room for him right above the front door. And downstairs in the hallway, he liked to write on a big marble-top table that he preferred. And the Mackenzie family passed down a lot of stories about his time there, said that they'd play leapfrog and leaping contests out in the yard. They'd take long hikes through the wilderness outside of Richmond. At night, he'd read poetry for the family, or they'd sit around Rosalie's piano while she played music and they sang songs together. There's an account of one night, Poe and the Mackenzie boys stayed out too late and they missed dinner. So they knew they'd get in trouble for missing dinner. They also kind of were hungry. So they found a bunch of soot and coal and smeared it all over their clothes. And when they got back home to Duncan Lodge, they told Mrs. Mackenzie that they were out battling a fire and they were rescuing people from the fire. And boy, were they hungry. And of course, she couldn't refuse service to these returning heroes. So not only did she fix them dinner, she welcomed them, and it wasn't until later she found they'd made the whole thing up. And that's not a side of Poe we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing the melancholy, morbid Poe, but the Mackenzies said this was a jovial fellow. He loved practical jokes and hoaxes. John Hamilton Mackenzie was a lifelong friend and even paid for Poe's wife's wedding dress. Even though he knew he'd never get repaid for all the loans that he gave to Poe, he didn't care. He said he'd do it all over again. And John was sort of a generous guy, had a lot of the orphans and widows in the family moving in with him, and never seemed to turn down anybody. So perfect guy to be one of Poe's lifelong friends. So why is it important that Poe stayed at Duncan Lodge? Well, it helps us piece together the timeline of Poe's last days in Richmond. You see, his last day in Richmond, he would have left Duncan Lodge in the morning to go back downtown, a few miles back downtown. Yeah, it's a few hours walk probably. And he accidentally left his boot hooks back at Duncan Lodge. Maybe he thought, well, he'd just return that evening, but it never happened. After spending some time at the messenger office, he gave the editor, John Reuben Thompson, a manuscript for his brand new poem, Annabel Lee, sort of as a thank you for giving him a loan. And then Poe headed up Church Hill, even farther away from Duncan Lodge, to spend some time with his new fiancée, Elmira Royster Shelton. After that, it was already evening, and he headed down Church Hill to Shockoe Bottom here and spent a while over at his friend John Carter's house where he left his walking stick. After that, he had to get back the opposite direction, another couple miles that way to Rocket's Landing to catch the very early morning steamship at 4:30 in the morning to get to Baltimore. So that meant he couldn't go all the way back to Duncan Lodge that evening, so he decided to catch a late dinner down here on Main Street at Sadler's Restaurant. After that, he left about midnight and would have walked that way to get to Rocket's Landing to catch the steamship. So it looks like he never went to sleep that night, and he probably would have been sitting out there waiting for the steamship to arrive, and maybe being exposed to elements, not getting any rest, maybe that contributed to his death roughly 10 days later. The doctors, they said that he died of inflammation of the brain, but they said it was caused by exposure to the elements. And here was Poe sitting out middle of the night waiting for a steamship to arrive. So maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe that's just a little clue to Poe's death. So what happened to these? Well, Poe's good friend, John Mackenzie, held on to them. And his first wife, this is going to get kind of tricky here. His first wife is named Louisa Lanier. Her cousin was Mary Maddox. And she actually lived with John and Louisa up until she got married. And then Louisa died, and Mary's husband died. So Mary, married John. But wait, there's more. So there was another cousin. So the first wife, Louisa Lanier, her brother was William Lewis Lanier. When he died, his daughter moved in with John Hamilton Mackenzie. He didn't marry that one. But her son was William Lanier Washington. And it's from his collection we got these. And we have the whole provenance written out here. And on the back, which normally people don't normally get to see the back, but you have the whole provenance in her handwriting, notarized by a notary from Danville, Virginia, where she lived. So all sorts of documentation. So basically, these stayed in the Mackenzie family until they came to the Poe Museum. Yes, these are the boot hooks that Poe used to pull up his boots, but they're also a whole lot more. So thanks for joining us this evening. And if you'd like to learn more about some of the artifacts in here, like Poe's penknife, his walking stick, his trunk, just catch some of our earlier Curator's Crypt videos for more information. And if you'd like to help us preserve these priceless Poe pieces for posterity, why not become a Poe Museum patron at patreon.com/Poe Museum. And as a way of thanking you for joining us tonight, I'll leave you with some more footage of the Poe Museum cats doing Poe Museum cat stuff.